Okay, thanks everyone for joining. If you're not able to join us live, hopefully you are watching this recording. We wanted to talk a little bit about what seems to be a current event topic with wearables and whether they have privacy requirements, are medical devices, and kind of exploring that topic in general to see it. My name is Vidya Murthy. I serve as COO at MedCrypt. Axel Worth, my colleague, serves as Chief Strategy Officer here at MedCrypt as well. If you have any questions as you go through this, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Our information is at the end of it, and we will distribute the slide and recording to the folks that registered as well. So with that, let's hop to it. The agenda for what we want to talk about is kind of what's happening in the current landscape, what has changed, the new reality that folks are facing. Then we want to talk about some of the regulatory attributes, including both the US as well as abroad, talking about how this impacts medical device manufacturers, and then just kind of wrap it up a little bit. If you have questions as we're working through it, don't hesitate to reach out. So just to start at the start, right? Why is this a topic of discussion right now? And I think at least what most of us have probably anecdotally seen, right? We used to see a lot of devices that were built for the purposes of tracking steps or tracking things that felt related to lifestyle wellness. I'm on keto. I want to do all these things, right? And now there's this progression of how far is too far with the data you're collecting when it comes to medical treatment. And so the way we think about it is gone from kind of this lifestyle device to something that should in fact be a regulated medical device. And that shift has been subtle but consistent over the years. And we've seen big tech kind of toe the line on that and what they gather and how it will be used. And now we're seeing more and more in the news about how this is something that needs to be perhaps more explicitly discussed. So from the FDA's perspective, there's a key attribute around intended use that defines whether it is a medical device or not. Now, if you're on this and you work at a medical device manufacturing company, this is likely something you're well aware of, but just in case, the use of the device and the implication of how that data will be used is what determines whether the device is a medical device or not. And interestingly, Axel, you're welcome to join in here, but I think there was an anecdote just recently where we had a large device maker who wanted to make the argument that a portion of their device was in fact not part of the medical device. And we kind of pointed out the logic for why we thought it should be included in the definition. They chose not to agree with us, ended up cutting back from the FDA saying, no, this is in fact part of the device and you need to actively manage it as if it is a medical device that the US regulator will approve or deny. And then the other part of this that really drives a lot of it is what type of data will be collected. I remember there were early pumps that were out on the market that they had a 8-digit number associated with them. And at the time, nobody thought about it, right? An 8-digit number, it's got to be everyone's social security, but it's fine. It doesn't matter. We'll use that as a patient identifier. Now, a lot more maturity has come to the marketplace in terms of defining what is sensitive data, who has sensitive data, why do we need this sensitive data, and thinking about it. And I think how we have matured in terms of understanding the types of data that now directly impacts what compliance you need to meet and what you need to adhere to. And I think the last point that I would just underline, I think globally, regulators have really matured their understanding of what data is being collected and how sensitive or not sensitive that data is and how that device will operate going forward. Actually, want to talk a little bit about what is HIPAA?
Yeah, so I mean, our background here at MedCrypt, and I assume many people listening in here is the medical device side, and we're used to designing devices that comply with FDA and other international regulations. HIPAA is probably new for many of us. We may have heard of it in the sense that our customers, meaning the hospitals, expect us to design devices that allows them to comply with HIPAA. But once we have data in our environment, for example, we manage the distribution of devices on behalf of, let's say, a healthcare provider. All of a sudden, we become a business associate under HIPAA, but we are a business associate to a covered entity being the hospital and the business associate now being the medical device manufacturer that holds patient data, right? So all of a sudden, if you're a business associate, you need to comply with the HIPAA security rule, meaning data needs to be encrypted at rest and in transit. You need to provide access control, audit trails, logging, training, and all those things. You also may be required by your customers to sign a business associate agreement because they're looking for legal protection as they give you data. They want to make sure that you understand your legal obligations in managing and handling that data. And then one area that is often causing confusion is the area of data residency. Right? So HIPAA does not require data residency in the US, but many hospitals will require from their business associates that they commit that data will be held only in the US. And the reason for that is should there be a security breach and the data is not stored on US soil by a business associate, then enforcing HIPAA and handing down legal responsibility to that business associate, it's much more complicated if the data is outside of the US. So even though it is not the word of the law, many customers will require that their business associates store data only on US soil. But even if you're, outside of that manufacturer/hospital relationship, so you may be a company that sells devices, software, trackers, wellness features directly to consumers, right? So in that case, you are not a healthcare provider. You may not be a business associate to a healthcare provider, and the data is not regulated under HIPAA. So that's the good news. However, the government a couple of years ago closed that loophole and basically instituted through the Federal Trade Commission, FTC, a set of legal requirements around breach notification and data privacy that is actually very similar to HIPAA, right? So even though you may have a device and you may be collecting data that does not need to be HIPAA compliant, the FTC rules still may apply. And then in either case, HIPAA or FTC, there's always state laws. Some are general privacy laws, like in California, for example. Some are specific to health data, like in Massachusetts, for example. And those laws actually may be going beyond what HIPAA or FTC is requiring. And you need to have the awareness of what is happening on a local state level as well.
So before we dive directly into states and kind of the nuances there, at the federal level, there was a lot that has, let's call it, matured in recent times to kind of play different roles here. So you have the FTC, and their primary role is to focus on unfair and deceptive practices, right? So unfair in this context is really trying to say that if I am giving data that should be reasonably expected to be protected, it is then breached or somehow exploited, that is an unfair thing to occur. And it's not super technical, somewhat by design, the definitions, right? Because I think they want to be able to enforce where applicable. And it's changing so rapidly in terms of, hey, now I have a data broker and I'm using anonymized data and I'm using ML, AI, blah, blah, blah. And it just becomes that much more complicated. The next one, the health breach notification rule, and there's a link to an article there, but it really talks about explicitly non-HIPAA related consumer apps, right? So you have a Fitbit tracker, you have a different app to track your food, and it's all related to you as an individual human. But that's not HIPAA because it's not the way the intended use is. And so in this case, there's also a breach notification rule there that gets implemented and enforced at the federal level that really forces folks to really manage data. The next one, the one around what they call key trigger. And so this one is, I think, most obviously selling data to a third party without explicit authorization. And I think there's a lot of apps that got in a little bit of trouble for doing that and sharing data when they should not have or didn't necessarily have the right to. And then I think that the thing that at its simplest, right, the federal objective is to do a better job of protecting consumers. And I think there's been some casual conversation about having some sort of mark on consumer devices that would speak to security posture, and it hasn't necessarily gotten legs too far. But I think that the spirit of this is that our consumers need a better solution than getting a device, using it, and then retroactively trying to fight for the security of their data. And I guess I would say the parallels of this in medical devices, right? Often in healthcare, the patient is the one who is blamed for non-adherence to prescriptions or non-adherence to whatever it is they're supposed to do. I think this is a general shift of, hey, instead of us putting the burden on the consumer here, let's instead do a better job trying to build devices that are more secure by design. Axel alluded to this, right? Each state or variety of states have started to come up with specific privacy laws that are relevant to them. And I think the biggest difference we've seen are kind of falling across this: what is the definition of personal data, and where is it broadly defined, where is it more specifically constrained, and making sure that you understand that in terms of where your device is going to be. And I think that while some states have shown a maturity with separately calling out health specific, like Washington, we haven't necessarily seen that. So, like, the California Privacy Act is intended to be more comprehensive than just healthcare specific. So, as device manufacturers, it is imperative to understand where you will be doing business and where your devices will ultimately land, because each state is starting down their own journey. And given the political climate, I can't imagine it gets any easier in the next couple of years here. But it's highly likely that this will continue to be something that evolves and becomes more and more prevalent, with states having separate requirements. Actually, I don't know if you had anything you wanted to add there.
Well, the nuances between states, right? What is, for example, defined as protected data varies from state to state. How many identifiers do you need to disclose in order to have a breach situation? Maybe fewer or more in different states. And then the regional applicability, and the example I always cite is here in Massachusetts, where I live. The state privacy law actually applies to state residents, and the Massachusetts AG actually has sued hospitals in neighboring states for data breaches of residents of Massachusetts. So again, overall, it is all about protecting our data as consumers, as patients, and the overall, as Vidya was pointing out, direction is clear, but there are more or less subtle differences from state to state on what is covered, who is covered, and what the implications are.
I think what has taken a lot of attention and gotten a lot of seemingly appropriate praise is around GDPR. And it's really set a standard that I think if folks are able to adhere to, I'm not saying 100% coverage. I'm also not a privacy lawyer, but I think it gets you to a solid posture where you could reasonably say you're meeting business requirements to be secure. And I think one of the two biggest things I think I would call out there, right, is privacy by design and having that be a default posture. So it can no longer be, hey, let's get all the device operational and then think about what we need to do to secure it. It's really thinking about getting the device to be as secure as possible from onset. And the cousin of that is data minimization. Only getting the data that you actually need, right? I know a lot of folks want data to be their big differentiator, and hey, we have access to all this data. But truly, if the posture is, hey, we want to collect as little as possible so we can keep the least amount of risk exposure from a data perspective, I think that really positions you differently than, oh, I'm going to collect all the data, but also, look, I'm going to do all the security stuff. Security is not 100%. We all know that, right? So it's really about how do you then manage when things go wrong, which according to GDPR, right, you have the 72 hours of having to notify once you're aware, which is a pretty tight turnaround. So I think the spirit of GDPR is certainly one where I think if taken to heart and really applied as intended, can posture a device to really succeed both at the federal, the state, and then international level. Axel, I know you've done a ton on the GDPR side. I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add.
Well, I think one key point to highlight here is that first bullet and the sentence that ends with by offering goods and services to them. That is the kind of like the clause of applicability. So, for example, if a hospital here in the US treats a European tourist that shows up with a stomach bug and needs to go into the emergency room, that does not require the hospital to be GDPR compliant. But if another hospital explicitly markets their service in Europe for certain procedures that may not be available over there, maybe have long waiting lists and whatnot, right? And invites people to come to the US, allows them to pay in euros and so forth, then very much so GDPR would apply. Because again, you're offering goods and services.
I love that example. I think it makes it very clear.
It's the difference between a medical tourist and a tourist with medical needs.
I love your clever couple sentences always. Cool. The next one. So Consolidated Appropriations Act 2023, and we, as folks have been hopefully listening in on the MedISAL series or other webinars hosted by MedCrypt, security is mandated, right? There's no universe in which a medical device running software does not need to demonstrate security considerations. Does that mean that every single thing is hardened, completely locked down? Not necessarily. It means that security has been considered, implemented, and is actively being managed both pre and post market. So the main things I think we would just underline here is around their software bill of materials that has gotten a lot of traction both by the regulator as well as the consumer of devices. So we've seen an increasing number of health systems mandating that they also get a software bill of material for a device prior or during their procurement process, which I think over the last 5 years has really been quite the shift in seeing the consumers of devices having a bit of a more mature posture around security than maybe they have historically. Oops. So connecting the regulatory dots, right? So you'd ask yourself, hey, how do I achieve this? Do I have to separately have all these considerations? Do I go for lowest common denominator? Do I go for most common denominator? And I think the idea here, at least these 5 points that we've kind of highlighted, really understanding kind of your confidentiality and trust in the device, right? So this is a lot of how the data is communicated, whether around cryptography, encryption, how data moves in transit, that sort of concept, I think has to be well addressed in whichever security posture you have. The next one is in post-market management, right? It can't be that my device is now out in the field and my strategy for updating my 8,000 devices is to have a person with a USB port flying around to update it, right? So having some sort of strategy in place for ongoing support, maintenance, bug patches, all the things I think are critical for a device maker to demonstrate. Next one, kind of the summary from the FTC and the state laws would be around authentication, really making sure that how devices are logged into and authenticated with is important. API, secure token management, I think is a bigger one as everybody wants to integrate all their different points, making sure we're actually doing that in an intentional and a careful way, I think really takes you far. Data minimization, I kind of spoke to this earlier, right? Get as little as possible, give it to as few people as possible to really make it constrained to what is actually useful and not just what would be nice to have. And this is kind of an interesting thing to contrast when you often listen to JP Morgan Week and you have a lot of CEOs up there talking about how getting all the data, building data lakes and having access to everything is the biggest differentiator. And this is probably a great example of where business need might be in direct conflict with security posture, and why having security be integrated into some of these conversations becomes increasingly important, because if those paths diverge too far, it can be really hard to bring them back to harmony without kind of great efforts to re-architect. And then the last one around breach preparedness, right? Having a really solid incident response strategy, making sure that you have the right players at the table, you've tested it and that you've learned, and you're ongoingly making sure the folks are trained and able to deal with an incident is really something that is it can't be overemphasized at all. And I think we've seen robust organizations that still struggle to get their incident response team to operate the way that they hope it will, or their procedure says it will. Actually, you want to talk a little bit about Illumina?
Yeah, sure. So I think this is an example that shows you what security gone wrong can mean to a business, right? So it is certainly important to understand as we are pointed out in her overview in the last slide, the breadth of security requirements, the breadth of privacy requirements, and privacy is implemented through security, right? And the efforts it requires not only on the device you design, but also then the backend data you may be storing and the analytics you're doing on that backend data. And then at the same time, we now know that wearable and wellness technologies become increasingly sophisticated, right? We now have watches that take your blood pressure. We now have rings that take your EKG, which is a technological miracle and a privacy nightmare. So clearly, the fact that you're entering the consumer space and you're operating in what you think is a non-regulated space does not, as this case here shows, exempt you from potential files under, again, state laws, FTC laws, and similar things.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is the first time the DOJ has brought a case against a medical device manufacturer that was rooted around security, which I think is a pretty landmark
Right.
thing to think about.
And based on the fact that FTC stated that they misrepresented the level of security they have in their devices and in their data handling. So clearly they picked up on that and the hammer came down.
So as device manufacturers, what should we work on as a reduction checklist? I think we've kind of spoken to many of these, right? But having a software bill of material, definite kind of table stakes to get through the regulator and likely get through your customer. Having plans to separate the sensitive data from non-sensitive data and really ensuring that where additional security is required, you're able to implement it on what is actually the scope of risk data. Because I think part of where security loses their voice is when they say, hey, everything is on fire all at once. We need to do all the things. If we're able to more concisely say what portion is highest at risk, how that portion can be targeted specifically, that may garner a bit of business support when you talk about it. Ensuring testing is up to date with current protocols and really ensures that best of practice is happening. We've seen huge advancements here with a lot of the, I'm saying AI, but I mean ML efforts that have happened recently, and it's becoming more consumer available for folks. So I think that's been a really cool kind of advancement that tangibly changes folks' lives. And then vendors, right, where third parties are used for designing devices, which is a very common practice, really ensuring an understanding of not just their security practices as an organization, but how they consider security into whatever device they're helping you develop. I think will go a long way to reducing some of the exposure on an attack surface. So in summary, right, I think there's four kind of main areas of risk that you have to understand for your not just organization at a corporate level, but also at the device level. You see civil penalties, things like GDPR, where they get enforced. We talked about the FTC. State litigation is becoming way more complicated than it was even 3 years ago. And then the FDA now has statutory authority to enforce a lot of their guidance and recommendations. So I think it really positions a device manufacturer from a security organization to say, hey, that this is the real risk that we are facing by not prioritizing security, and point to specific requirements that are out there that can turn into direct dollars that an organization could have to pay out. So you want to do this one?
Yeah. So getting to the wrap up here and to the end of our time, but what can you do to be prepared? What can you do to avoid painful penalties and legal situations? Audit your data, right? Know what you have and classify it under which regulation would that data fall. Default by design. Design by default, right? Design by default.
I think I got that backwards. Yep.
Or wait, no, secure by design and privacy by default. Yeah. Okay.
There you go. Yep.
I got that. Okay. Yeah, from the get-go, right? If you develop the concept of a new product, make sure that you think those things through right from the get-go. Protecting data after the fact, once your design is complete, implementing security, bolting it on after the fact becomes challenging and will result in less desirable and, frankly, more expensive solutions. Right? Know your flow. Explicit informed consent to be obtained before data is shared. Make sure that you have the right tools in place, the right controls in place, especially if you're considering to market any data you're collecting either yourself or through third parties, and make sure that you comply with any transparency or consent requirements that is stipulated under the various laws and regulations. Test for compliance, right? Make sure that your assumptions are tested, and ideally you want to have that done by an independent entity. But you don't want the engineer that wrote the code also test the code or look for potential privacy or security holes. You want a fresh set of eyes, and you want somebody who is not necessarily tied to the business success of the product that you're about to release. You want objectivity rather than bias. And be prepared, right? It doesn't matter how much you do, but make sure that you have an incident response plan. Make sure that your team is trained and has done mock exercises with that incident response plan, and make sure that it meets regulations. For example, the very tight 72-hour deadline under GDPR for breach notification. Under HIPAA and FTC, it's 60 days, so you're a little better off there. But if you are GDPR compliant, it's fairly tight. And make sure that every time you had an incident and you went through your incident response plan, you do a postmortem and update the plan. Make sure that you address those areas that didn't work as intended. Yeah, and consider complexity, right? It is not just FDA, as we many times think. It's not just HIPAA, as we many times think, but we need to understand the full regulatory environment. And we had examples coming either from the states, from FTC, or from regulators and lawmakers in other countries.
Cool. So that brings us to the end of it. If, as you are working through your device getting through to market, you have questions about security, privacy, or just want to chat more about this, happy to hop on a call. Please don't hesitate to reach out, and we will share the recordings, the slides, as well as sign up for the next session. Thank you to those who joined, and all the best. Keep well.